Full hastily our king was dight, so were his knights 5, every one of them in monk's weed, and haste them thither blithe. Our king was great above his cowl, a broad hat on his crown, right as he were abbot-like, they rode up to the town. Stiff boots our king had on, forsooth as I you say, he rode singing to Greenwood, the convent was clothed in grey. His mailors and his great somers followed our king behind, till they came to Greenwood, a mile under the line. There they met with good Robin, standing on the way, and so did many a bold archer, forsooth, as I you say. Robin took the king's horse, hastily in that stead, and said, Sir Abbot, by your leave, a while ye must abide. We be yeomen of this forest, under the greenwood tree. We live by our king's deer, other shift have not we. And ye have churches and rents both, and gold full great plenty. Give us some for your spending, for Saint Charity. Welcome to the Greenwood. I'm your host, Thaddeus Papke, and this is the podcast where we peek under the hood of the most famous outlaw who may have never been. From archers to archaeologists, we interview subject matter experts to learn why the figure of Robin Hood continues to endure and consider what we can learn by examining what is known as the matter of the Greenwood. The reading in the cold open comes from the long poem known as A Jest of Robin Hood, that first saw print sometime around the late 1400s or early 1500s. It is widely believed to be a collection of tales that were initially composed much earlier, that were basically tossed together in order to profit off of the character's popularity as literacy rates were rising in Western Europe. One edition was printed in Antwerp, circa 1510, and sometimes gets called the Lettersnijder edition, but I've mostly seen it called the Antwerp edition. It uses a lot of archaic language that has led scholars to conclude that it does much to preserve how the rhymes of Robin Hood that William Langland mentioned in 1377 may have sounded. Unfortunately, less than 50% of the Antwerp edition has been preserved. Printed around that same time, though, by the aptly named Into the Greenwood of London, a version titled A Little Jest of Robin Hood was incredibly popular and would be reprinted many times through the 16th century, sometimes with minor alterations by other printing establishments. Many modern scholars will rely on a sort of Frankenstein version that preferences the Antwerp edition, but with the Into the Greenwood version used to fill in the missing gaps. The fragment that I read at the top of the show is a version from Harvard University that modernizes some of the spelling for readability. I will include a link in the episode description. One more note regarding the jest. The word jest is spelled G-E-S-T. It comes from an archaic term for a story, especially one of adventure. It originates from the Latin word gestus, which can mean to carry or to bear, and is the origin of words like gesture, ingest, suggest. I tend to pronounce it with a soft G sound, like jiff, but others, including today's guest, usually use a hard G sound. You know, like GIF. I haven't been able to pin down a scholarly consensus on how the word is supposed to be pronounced, so I just wanted to prepare you for hearing it both ways over the course of this episode. And the reason that the jest, or guest, of Robin Hood is going to be discussed a lot in this episode is because it provides a substantive link between Robin Hood and a popular tale type known as king and commoner tales. Very roughly put, sort of the medieval version of the show Undercover Boss, but also a form of storytelling that harkens back to mythological tales of hospitality as well. However, I will let today's guest, Mark Truesdale, author of The King and Commoner Tradition, Carnivalesque Politics in Medieval and Early Modern Literature, explain the tropes associated with these tales and how well Robin Hood fits in amongst them. Do make sure to stick around until the end of the episode to hear a little bit of bonus discussion between myself and Mark about some memorable Robin Hood films, from the best to the worst to the most obscure. So, string your bow, ready some hospitality for any incognito monarchs that cross your path, and prepare your list of grievances about the ruling classes as we enter the Greenwood with medieval scholar Mark Truesdale. Thank you so much for joining me here in the Greenwood on this sunny Saturday afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
So my guest today is Robin Hood scholar and medieval historian Mark Truesdale. Mark, would you mind introducing yourself and saying how you came to Robin Hood and medieval studies?
I'm Mark Truesdale. I first came to Robin Hood studies, like many, via Stephen Knight, I guess. I studied under Professor Stephen Knight at Cardiff University, did a BA on Robin Hood literature under him. I then enjoyed it so much, I went on to do my MA dissertation under Stephen, and then went on to do a PhD looking at the king and commoner tradition, which kind of tales associated very close to the medieval Robin Hood tales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a little funny you say that about coming to them by studying under Stephen Knight. Just yesterday, I was interviewing Alex Kaufman, who came to Robin Hood studies by studying under Thomas Algren. So kind of these two sort of giants in the field. I never really thought about king and commoner tales in relation to Robin Hood until I read Story Worlds of Robin Hood, The Origins of a Medieval Outlaw by Leslie Coote. In her chapter about trickster tales, she starts by discussing what one could call king and commoner tales, which seems like a good segue to say just what is a king and commoner tale?
Well, you could very much describe them as kind of fellow matter of the Greenwood, I guess, in
Yeah.
terms of medieval literature. You often get them recorded in written in the same forms. They're often in the same manuscripts as the medieval Robin Hood tales as well.
Mm-hmm.
The Robin Hood tales are in manuscript form, both appear alongside King Commoner tales. So yes, the basic plot of the medieval King Commoner tale is a king goes into the forest usually to hunt, and gets separated from his followers or lost. And in a medieval romance, you might expect him to then come across a adventure or a quest. Instead, he comes across a rustic commoner with various political complaints against the king's court, which we'll definitely get into. Yeah, the commoner then invites the king back to his place and ends up putting on a feast for the king. The commoner usually brings out food fairly appropriate to his class, and then brings out this vast feast of poached deer, by which I mean stolen, illegally taken from the king's forest.
Yeah,
So
it's very much a hey, I got this stuff. It's from the king. Don't tell, anybody about it. And he gives it to the king.
There's very often that kind of comic situation played with, kind of saying, don't tell anyone that I do this, because it's illegal and it costs him his life. But yeah, he
Mm-hmm.
poaches the king's deer. So lives in the forest, poaches the king's deer, has his complaints against the court. The second half of the tales sees the king invite the commoner back to the court under some pretense. He still hasn't revealed his true identity yet, the king. And once the commoner then gets to the court, he's then usually presented with this second royal feast during which the king's identity is revealed. The king usually then pardons the commoner, gives him a position within the court, sometimes a financial reward. That's the kind of the basic premise, although there are lots of complexities and tensions within that.
Right. Well, and it really, resonates with me in terms of, classic mythology and like Ovid's story of Zeus and Hermes visiting the poor couple, Bacchus and Philemon. And you get similar stories with Odin also, which is about somebody who is in those cases gods, but in the King Commoner Tales a king, but somebody of some form of high power and authority, somebody who may as well be godlike to us, poor plebes, and then behaving in a way that indicates especially that they're a truthful person, that they express some sort of honesty, and that they are engaging in hospitality, and then they get rewarded for their hospitality and their honesty. And that seems to be the basic formula. And then these king and commoner tales sort of ground them down a little bit and make them more of a it could happen to you sort of situation.
Yes, I mean, well, it kind of goes across so many cultures. There's also the Arabian Nights has some very similar ones with one of the caliphs, whose name's completely gone out of my head at the moment. There's a very similar thing. Yeah, you could also look at some biblical tales with angels visiting
Oh yeah.
people. But yeah, and even in medieval literature, there are a couple of hints of an older tradition. The most famous of which is King Alfred, who flee after sometimes running away from a battle, ends up meeting a swineherd and his wife and stays incognito again with them.
Hmm.
And he ends up he's told to watch the cakes on the fire by the wife, and he kind of falls asleep or drifts off, and the wife realizes they've burnt, so she whacks the king over the head, letting the cakes burn. So yeah, there are these little bits and pieces, but yeah, once you get to the 15th century, like very much like the Robin Hood tales, suddenly you get this explosion of tales being recorded, and it seems to have at least morphed into its own unique thing,
Hmm.
especially these medieval texts which have this emphasis on illicit feasting, poach feasting in the forest, and also these political complaints, which are fairly unique in these tales, or relatively unique anyway.
Yeah, and so the with the Robin Hood tradition, like the king being in incognito, that's really I think that a crucial part in that is manifest in the Jest of Robin Hood or Guest of Robin Hood, and guest Gest, not he is being a guest in, in the Guest form.
Yes.
Um, but the king is in disguise.
Mm.
And then the illicit feasting part, like those two parts are like very central to the Robin Hood elements of it, and those are the ones that echo down the centuries into later retellings. The political complaints seem actually kind of almost weirdly absent in the Robin Hood versions.
Mm.
Like I can like just trying to think of what I can remember of the variations I have seen in Robin Hood tellings. It's kind of only the 1938 Robin Hood film with Errol Flynn where a political complaint comes into it.
I think also, if I remember rightly, the Adventures of Robin Hood TV show from 1955
Mm.
also plays with the king perhaps not always being a good king, perhaps, if I remember rightly. It's been a while since I saw it though. Oh,
Yeah,
and the Robin of Sherwood actually strongly plays with that, with the king definitely being a bad king.
yeah,
Um,
Yes,
Mm.
but that comes out later. That does have those tropes of the incognito king and the illicit feasting, and there's a great moment in there where the king balks at the price he's being asked to pay for the venison, and Robin says that because this is are these poached deer, that each of them is worth their lives. So that means that it is very expensive. So of course it is worth the coins in your purse. And I thought that was a great bit.
Do you think I carry my money bags with me when I go hunting?
What about his horse?
For a piece of venison?
That piece of venison could hang the lot of us.
So, if your horse is worth 4 men, then that piece of meat must be worth twice as much.
Yeah.
In the Errol Flynn film, there's again a very good line when the king is in disguise and the king asks Robin if he blames Prince John for the country's problems. And Robin says, "No, I blame the king. He shouldn't have left. He should be here doing his job."
Well, Sir Rascal, tell me, who are you?
I'm called Robin Hood.
Seems I've heard of you.
Nothing good, I hope.
Ah, now I remember. How is your loyalty to Richard set on a killer of knights, a poacher of the king's deer, and an outlaw?
Those I killed died for misusing the trust that Richard left. And the worst rogue of these is the king's own brother.
Ah, then you blame Prince John.
No, I blame Richard. His task was here at home, defending his own people instead of deserting them to fight in foreign lands.
What, you condemn holy crusades?
Aye, I'll condemn anything that leaves the task of holding England for Richard to outlaws like me.
So that's like one of the very few times you get the Robin Hood holding the king to task for while not knowing that it's the king he's talking to. In the medieval stuff, in like the Jest of Robin Hood, it seems to be much more of a, oh, we're all very loyal to, in that case, King Edward.
But it's odd. You can certainly read kind of implicit criticisms in the medieval texts, but they're kind of subtle. They're kind of all played with in this kind of trickster, subtle way. Like in maybe Robin Hood and the Monk, you have this. The king ends up realizing that Little John and Robin is a better servant to Robin Hood than his servants are to him, and kind of deliberately trying to trick the king, and rather than going to him to beg for justice or mercy, say, deliberately trying to trick him. And then, in the Guest, again, it doesn't have the outright complaints that we'll look at in the King Commoner text, but again, the kind of there's kind of little subtle things, like you kind of have Robin saying, we love our king, he's the best person in the world, we're all faithful to him, and yet at the same time, the reason the king's there is because he's wander off with Robin Hood for killing all of the deer in Plompton Park. He calls for the head of Sir Richard the Lee, who just for helping Robin Hood escape. So clearly he intends at this point for Robin Hood to die. And Robin then immediately serves up this feast of poached deer taken from the king for love of our king. There's this kind of tension at play, but it's underneath, and you can read it both ways. I think that's quite important, perhaps.
I think that's a very
subtle.
I think that's a good point. And thinking more on the Jest in that scene, because after the king has revealed himself, there is a difference between that and some of the other King and Commoner tales, in that while the king is incognito to start with, he gets revealed before they return to the king's court. So he does get revealed, and then they do this kind of mock joining of Robin's men. He gets suits of Lincoln Green for him and his men, and they go off to Nottingham Castle kind of under the guise of being in Robin's company. And I think there's a line in there about how they have archery contests on the way, and the king loses and gets buffeted, gets the punishment for losing the archery contest is contesting, which means he's getting knocked around, like physically
Yeah.
knocked around by Robin.
And as soon as they leave the forest, the people flee, thinking the king has been killed by Robin Hood, and the revolution's come. Essentially,
Right.
Yeah, it's. I mean, yeah. I mean, we can come back to it, but I feel like this element of reversal, because it sets up with the way the king's revealed is through this beating game. Can you shoot a target? You miss, you get beaten. And Robin beats all of his men, but when Robin loses, who beats him? So he turns to his guests, and from the strength of the king's arm, the king is revealed. And you can see this kind of hierarchy. It's kind of Robin will beat his men. The person above him must be the king. Must be the only person who could have beaten him. It's a weird reveal. It's not really given anything beyond that. The cliff of his arm. And then he kind of says, "Oh, well, you must come to my court now. You must be one of my men. You must leave this way of life. You must stop butchering my deer." Actually, and the king and Robin Hood said, "Yes, of course, we will do that." And then, yes, you say, immediately dresses up the king, so king's joining his band. So this kind of reversal, and then beats the king as so again. So now, if we had hierarchy in place, now Robin Hood's at the top, beating the person below him, the king, dressed in his livery. So yeah, there's this weird world turned upside down. It's kind of constantly turning. There's this reversibility, and I think this comes from the King Commoner text, because we'll get into probably the I very strongly believe that these King Commoner texts draw on the medieval carnival, where you have this idea of the mock king for the day, the person who will lead the feast of fools, say. And the medieval carnival is full of reversibilities. You know, the mock bishop or the boy bishop, or the usually relatively lower class person elected to lead the May games, which was often played by someone dressing up as Robin Hood. And he would, of course, get people to then join his band with kind of livery badges, which is kind of what happens with the king as well. But the entire premise is this day of inversion. There's this kind of medieval trope of the world turned upside down, and it really seems to draw into that. And again, these kind of feastings, which are very much key to these King and Commoner texts, these kind of feasts where everything goes through a day, and the lower class person can become the king, can become the ruler at the feast. I think this kind of reversibility that you see in the Guests kind of is coming from that, in my opinion, from drawing on this King and Commoner narrative. It's kind of world constantly in flux, where authority is constantly turned from one to the other.
That seems very much at play there in the Guest. And then in some ways, I think that could be said to continue, because what happens next in the poem is they do go to King Edward's court. Robin serves there in his court for, I think, 12 months and 3, so for like 15 months. He's there in the court, but he's a bit of a spendthrift now that he's given an actual allowance. I think only like Little John and Will Scarlet are with him, or maybe I'm mixing that up with another version. And then he's like, I'm sick of this life. I'm broke. I miss getting to just shoot the king's deer whenever I want. And so he abandons the king to just go back to Sherwood. He makes up an excuse. You know, he's going to go. He needs to go to a shrine that he established in Barnesdale, and then just pieces out and doesn't come back. Because
the first thing he does when reaching the forest is to shoot one of the king's deer again, which is what he's been specifically told not to do. And then, for all the dread of our king, he again would not go to the courts. Again, in this sense of enmity, it ends with.
And they get this idea that, well, in the forest, he gets to be his own lord, and that's what he prefers rather than serving the king.
Well, throughout the Robin Hood tales, you have this kind of Robin Hood's kind of trickster economics of just giving generously and just presuming the money will come back. You know, but, that monk is there. He's bringing back the loan. Kind of, I'll rob him. Kind of, you don't need to pay me back. The monk was sent to me by the Virgin Mary.
You swore by the Saint Mary, so it's all good.
This kind of excess of generosity, and also like Robin Hood and the potter, when he goes and sells all his pots cheap, but then gets all his money by robbing the sheriff. It's kind of Yeah, so he's able to then pay back far more than was expected. It's kind of this, uh, yeah, these kind of trickster economics that is then completely thwarted once he's brought into the court, and he can't live by those rules anymore. So he has to be constrained by this official court life. So he ends up broke. He talks about he can't sleep, he can't eat nor drink. Again, this kind of can't sleep there, he can't eat, he can't drink, he's starving. The court is this place of starvation, of restriction, of fear. And he says, if I stay here any longer, sorrow will me slew. It's this place of death. It's kind of, it's very unusual. And then whilst the forest is then this place of life and giving and generosity and feasting. And that's kind of the wrong way round if you look at medieval romance. Something like Gawain the Green Knight, say, the court in the wilderness, the Green Knight's court is the place of restriction, of death, of execution. It's turned upside down, and that's unusual. And I can't help but see it as a kind of a critique of this old feudalistic structure, perhaps, that certainly Thomas Olgren argues that the readership of the likes the Guest were kind of kicking out against. It's kind of new rising mercantile class breaking away from feudalism. It's kind of this, seeing this new world, perhaps. But,
and I think that is, I think there's a lot of in the text that supports that, including this is a Robin Hood who is not coming from the noble classes. So in a lot of the modern film adaptations, what a lot of people might be familiar with is the idea of a Robin Hood who is a nobleman who then at the end of the story gets his lands back. You know, they're granted back to him by good King Richard or whatever, or something along those lines. And he is re-ennobled and no longer has to be this slumming it with the outlaws in the forest. But in the medieval texts, he is not a lord, and he is not directly in the king's service. He's not rubbing elbows with any of the nobility other than Sir Richard of the Lee, who he bailed out earlier. And so like Sir Richard kind of feels like he owes him this debt. And he says as much in the text too. So like he is capable of like kind of hanging out with some of the gentry like Sir Richard, and then impresses King Edward when he comes to the forest and gets taken into the king's service, but it's not where he belongs. It's not the class that he is of. And then the poem ends, you know, with the line about having done poor men much good, you know? It doesn't feel like it is written for an aristocratic audience.
Yeah, and that's why I think like this, it has this kind of implicit politics, even if it doesn't have some of the outright statements of these the medieval King Commoner texts. It has this kicking out against authority in a weird way.
So in the other texts, what kind of more explicit complaints would come up from the commoners that the king encounters?
Wow. If we look at, say, King Edward and the shepherd, you have the king goes into the forest, he meets Adam the shepherd, and we're immediately told that the king's men have robbed Adam. He says, I'm so pilled with the king, I'm so angry with the king, that I must flee from my wonning, my home, and therefore woe is me. I had cattle, I have I none. The king's men, they take my business and don them slon. They killed them and paid me but a stick of tree, tally stick. So you have this world in which the king's men are coming in and taking his means of living and sustenance to both maintain and increase the commoners' poverty. These are kind of royal raiding parties, which did exist at the time, very often did exist. He also talks about 9 more, and it's left very vague as to whether these outlaws are more of the more courtiers who have also come and taken more of his livestock and raped his daughter. And this kind of thing ends up casting a shadow over the court scenes at the end when he's trying to get help for these people that are coming again to attack his daughter, and the king doesn't care, essentially. So already you have this world where the commons are kind of living in fear of royal raiding parties, of people who are not upholding the law, but are becoming criminals themselves who are oppressing the commons. This then becomes combined with this focus on kind of restrictions, what they can eat or drink. So as they're going through the forest, they see deer and rabbits from the king's warren, and the king's kind of saying in incognito, king's saying, "Oh, you should kill them. You should take them. You should have them for our dinner." And says, "If I do that, then the foresters will kill me. My sides will bleed." He also talks about that you shouldn't speak so loudly because wood has ears and field has sight. This kind of notion that you could be being watched from any point. And it's a dangerous world for them. And of course, he is being watched. He's being watched by this king who's trying to kind of lure Adam towards his death by his own ruthlessly imposed laws. It's very odd.
Okay, so that brings up a question about whether or not the king in these stories is, intentionally trying to trap somebody like Adam into breaking the law, or if the king is ignorant of his own laws and how cruel they are. Because I feel that's the very modern version, in that Prince and the Pauper tradition of the noble person not realizing how oppressed everybody is.
Yeah, well, it's kind of possible, but then we're also told that the foresters have been given a lodge by the king because he loves them so much. So, and the king just seemed very aware. Kind of, these are his deer, these are his rabbits. He knows that they will be killed. So I don't you. And then if you look at, say, John the Reeve, it's perhaps kind of even more explicit. He ends up quite early on, declares to the king, "Of lords speak no more. With them I have nothing to do, nor never think to have, for I'd rather be brought in bail, I would rather be arrested. My hood that I would veil, I would bring down, on them to crouch or crave." He talks about the king's statutes, which mean that he is forced to eat salt bacon of a year old and drink ale that is both sour and cold. For I dare not eat that I get, thereof I am full wrath. For he that first starveth John the Reeve, I pray to God he may never well achieve, he may never well prosper, neither on water nor land, whether it be sheriff or king that makes such a statuing. I accept never a one, I don't accept any of them. This is quite a statement to say I would refuse to veil my hood to lower my hood to a lord, and to say this kind of curse on the king. He hopes that he will never thrive while the king starves the commons. This is a time of the the background of the 1381 to 1450 peasants' revolts, in which you have this horror at the meeting of Rich II and the commons because he tried to shake the king's hand, let alone kind of not veiling his hood. It's very outspoken for the time. It's very much in defiance of lords of hierarchy, and really painting these kind of hierarchical restrictions, what they can eat and drink, as being this kind of things that oppress the commons and should be got rid of. And then, of course, we get to the feasts, where the feasts start by bringing out stuff that the commoners normally would eat, usually eliciting the king's horror.
Right.
And
because we're bringing out the swans and the venison, which are both protected.
Yeah. Hence, then we get on a course sometimes, usually then of birds, of these kind of huge amount of birds and swans, which, if you look at things like Woolgar's study of great households in the Middle Ages, can see rival the grandest estates already. Those kind of type of food that would only be for a lord's mess. And then we're told, but thereof the commoner would not let. And then he brings out the venison, or in King Edwin the Shepherd, also those rabbits from the king's warren, which were told that no one could poach or they would be killed.
Right.
So kind of reaching, and you can see this kind of hierarchy rising through hierarchy, starting at the commons' food, going to the lords, and then ending up at the king's table and grasping it all. And you have Adam the shepherd says something like, "With these my stink and take, thereof I am no wretch." It's kind of this idea that they're kind of going to escape feudalism, escape these kind of hierarchical restrictions, break out of them. You kind of in medieval literature, there's lots of complaint literature you can compare these texts to, and they're always, and things like, we're starving, we have no food, every fourth penny goes to the king, but that's where they end. It's always just things that are wrong, and it's often said that it's only when it comes to around the peasant revolt you suddenly get this more insurgent literature that changes tone by saying we're going to take action. Now is the time to take action.
Right.
And if you look at something like the alleged speech of John Ball at the edge on the eve of the 1381 rebellion, he kind of says, "All you good people, the matters goeth not well to pass in England, nor shall not do till everything be common, that there be no villains nor gentlemen, that we are all united together, and that the lords be no greater masters than we be. They have their wines and spices and good bread, and we are the drawing out of chaff and drink water." There's this kind of notion, whether he said it or not, that the way to achieve equality is to grasp these aristocratic markers for themselves, to rise themselves up by taking this food and drink. And that's what we get here. Suddenly they're feasting on venison. They've also got aristocratic wine, and it kind of breaks from what we saw in the forest, this kind of restrictions coming from the court, restricting what the commons can eat, often with emphasis on them being starved. And then you have these illicit feasts that break apart the world suddenly. And suddenly the commoner seems to be a king for the day, at least, from his own little carnival world where he can have whatever he wants and break out of his restricted world.
Yeah. Just to kind of help build out the world that these people were living in and struggling in, and in the case of John Ball being firebrands in, this is a world in which there were sumptuary laws. When were the sumptuary laws put in place, and would you say a little bit about how kind of what their purpose was? It's one of those things I don't know enough about medieval law to really talk about them, but they're the sort of thing that would surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, they really start to come in post Black Death, essentially. After the Black Death, there was a shortage of labor, which allowed workers to start charging more and start to move around as well. Before they always fixed to their sort of loss of land, essentially, with wages very fixed. Now they could start going to the highest bidder and demanding more, just because purely of the shortage of workforce. And because of this, wages started to rise, and you get this kind of slow break out of feudalism. You get this kind of rising class who are able to, especially mercantile class, who are able to start demanding more, and artisans start to demand more money for their goods. And as a result of that, there was this aristocratic fear that because they started being able to purchase more, suddenly you had these people who they saw as peasants able to buy clothes that were formerly marked out aristocrats. And they get very frightened of this. So they start issuing these sumptuary laws from the 14th century, restricting what people can wear. So say, you can't have that. That's a materialistic marker of the aristocracy. So you very have this very materialistic definition then of hierarchy. There's very much visible symbols, and saying, no, only we are allowed to have them. Otherwise, what are we, essentially? And the fact that they kept being issued these laws seems to also indicate that they weren't effective at all.
Right.
I do think it really plays into these these texts, this kind of materialistic overreaching, this wanting to grasp the aristocratic, to ingest it, make it part of themselves. And
so just to kind of help establish a sort of timeline, when we're talking about the Black Death, the bubonic plague that wiped out a huge percentage of the population, we're talking smack dab in the middle of the 14th century, in the 1300s. And then it is shortly thereafter that we think people were starting to tell stories about Robin Hood. We get the first literary reference from William Langland, where he just mentions the existence of Rhymes of Robin Hood in 1377. And it's by this time that the sumptuary laws are being passed, right?
Yes.
And then the Peasants' Revolt happens kind of right in that sphere as well in the 1380s. And then the Jest of Robin Hood and the stories that we're talking about, we don't know exactly when they're being composed. We don't know if how much of anything that's in the Jest is something William Langland might have heard towards the end of the 14th century. We just know that it was being written down by the middle of the 15th century, right?
Yes.
And during the 1300s, when the Black Death happens, when the sumptuary laws are being passed, this is during the reign of King Edward.
Edwards. Yes.
or at least one of the Edwards. Yeah, there was like over 100 years of King Edward in England, right?
This was one of the interesting things of these texts as well, by the way. This King Edward and the Shepherd is specifically Edward III. We also have one set in the reign of Edward IV. We also have the King and Commoner one, which is an unnamed Edward.
And in
there's also John the Reeve is an Edward I. So
really?
in some ways, it doesn't matter. It's all of the Edwards.
Right. Well, and to people writing in the mid 1400s, this is from 100 years ago for them or more. So it has moved into that fuzzy past. Edward, one could imagine a sort of an amalgamation where Edward just means king that was in the past.
Yes.
I think at least the relatively recent past, at least.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is what it is, and why there are so many Edwards, and the number almost doesn't seem to matter for most of these tales.
Yeah, and in the Guest of Robin Hood and in Robin Hood and the Monk, it's just King Edward. Our homely king.
Yes. So these tales are all kind of emerging from this interesting period where you have this kind of rise of a new class, you have the breakdown of feudalism. So, things are changing, and perhaps and literacy is also rising, which is why perhaps a lot of these texts are starting to be written down.
Right. More point of writing down a text if somebody can read it.
With kind of these non-aristocratic seeming texts anyway. So you do have this kind of changing society, and it's interesting that out of this emerges kind of new types of heroes, such as these commoners and the King Commoner tradition, and of course Robin Hood, this yeoman, kind of mercantile, kind of outlaw adventurer who's able to become this new kind of cultural hero. Like in the Guest, of course, we have the start of it. He's refusing to eat before a guest arrives, which is parodying the King Arthur text.
Right.
Instead of and then who arrives, but it's a poor knight who seems to be from Sir Lawnful, some of medieval romance. This knight who's fallen out of the aristocratic world, whilst Robin Hood, this yeoman outlaw, is rising into it and starting resembling King Arthur. So you have this kind of new hero, this new literature, grasping against these kind of former markers of power, these former tales of power as well. So it is an interesting time, and I do think that these texts are kind of emerging from that and commenting on it. It doesn't need to always specifically be, the literature of the revolters necessarily, but it's definitely coming from this time, this upheaval, this search for new heroes who perhaps aren't just knights and aristocrats. And certainly I think in both are communicating some of these more radical ideas as well beneath the surface, for me anyway.
And so one of the things I've been thinking about, and I'd like to get your take on this, is in the Middle Ages, when the tales are being written down and being told and becoming popular, there is that hunger as you were just expressing, for this little bit of radicalization, this little bit of, oh, we can have a common person who gives as good as he gets with the king. And by the 1800s, we're well past the Middle Ages. We are past what we consider the age of kings. England, of course, still has a king or queen for much of the 1800s, still has a monarchy, but it feels less like it is this feudal system that is bringing people down. So my kind of take is that it then becomes easier for these tropes that existed with the King and Commoner tales to then get kind of switched around again a little bit, kind of a little bit almost like they had been, like with the mythology we were talking about earlier, where the king figure is once again put in a higher position of power. And I'm especially thinking of works like Ivanhoe, where we have King Richard coming in and in disguise in the forest, but he has so much agency and so much power, so much authority. And then this gets echoed strongly in other versions, other tales. In the Howard Pyle version, it takes basically the action of the jest, almost like everything exactly as it happens in the jest, but substitutes King Edward for King Richard the First, and kind of just expands on a lot of those ideas, but really does build up how powerful and mighty King Richard is, and really emphasizes how loyal Robin and his men are. And unlike the medieval text, there isn't a scene where Richard dons Robin's clothes and gets his own buffets as well. And then in the film age, in the movies, in 1922, we get the Ivanhoe King Richard as the Black Knight again, almost showing up like a superhero to save the day at the climax of the film. And then I feel this is, more or less continued with some inversion, like we see with Robin of Sherwood, which is one of the few that really says, hey, let's actually think about this a little bit. But in that 1800s and much of the 1900s, we have felt more comfortable with monarchs. So we've taken this idea of the king and the commoner, but still kind of glorified the king, but with the things of those earlier tales.
I mean, Ivanhoe's also an interesting one because it draws on another medieval King Commoner tale, the King and the Hermit.
But which also has the feasting component.
Yes, and which has a feasting Friar Tuck. Curiously, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying mostly Friar Tuck's course the Curtal Friar, the Frighting Friar, and then you have this feasting friar drawn from another tradition. They get merged to create a new Friar Tuck, perhaps. But the thing that's missed, and deliberately missed in Scott's adaptation, is that the hermit critiques the king by saying, after giving his feast, this poached feast, by saying, I've been to court before. I've stood there for half a day with the poor waiting to get fed, and you refuse to feed us. So I poach your deer and give it out to my neighbours and send it to the poor. And that bit's pretty much the only bit of that tale that's completely removed by Walter Scott. Yeah, the King and Commoner tales, as soon as you get to the early modern period, really, as soon as they're being put under that print censor, they start to become more conservative. The poached feasts completely disappear. That kind of inversion, similarities between King and Commoner disappears. And instead you have this increasingly conservative texts, which are all about the king's authority. The commoner is very rude, rough, just farts at the king or something.
Yeah.
You also have things like there's one
a kind of a low humor instead of a subversive humor.
Yeah, you have one about Henry VIII who goes incognito to visit a Cistercian abbot, I think it is, and then arrests him, and then starves him in the Tower of London, then watches at the keyhole while he's given this illicit feast by the prison warden, arranged by Henry VIII, so he can then burst in and say, "Ha ha! Now I have fed you as you once fed me." And when you get to the reign of William of Orange, William III, you suddenly have these king. I think it's 2 or 3 King Commoner texts that are put out and are about him just after he gets to the throne, and all about how good he is and how many kings have been said to have wandered amongst subjects in the past, but these are all fables. This is the real one, and it's William, and he's the best king that's ever been. It's royal propaganda.
And this would have been shortly after the Restoration, right?
Yes. So you kind of increasingly these texts become royal propaganda, and all of that former radicalism completely wiped away. It's fascinating. But even in the medieval King Commoner texts, you have this. While you have all of the initial complaints in the forest, you could also see the court scenes as a kind of conservative containment, perhaps, because you have the commoner coming to court, and he's made a target for aristocratic laughter because the king's told them all what's going on, and he becomes the butt of a joke. And when the commoner gets there, someone is put at the head of the table, but only to be laughed at, and mocked. And the court is constantly have the commoners often kind of clawing at their heads and fearing that they're going to be hanged. The court seems to be filled with kind of execution imagery and mental torture. And then the commoner ends up being rewarded by the king, which some critics have said is kind of the apex of the victory over hierarchy. Some have said shows a weird conservative ending. I think it's somewhere weirdly between the two.
Okay.
Because the commoner often seems, after they've been rewarded, seems sad about it. They say, "I would rather be at home," or kind of, "I wish I'd never come." After a collar reward, kind of promoting him, I've often heard after a collar comes a rope. They kind of turns that kind of band that knights him into a hangman's noose. And I think it's because once they're in that center, they also have to, and they've been rewarded, they also have to abandon their poach feasting. They are suddenly no longer escaping hierarchy anymore, really. They're kind of a court fool. And they have to now, a part of they get a reward, but they're told that they can no longer poach. They can no longer resemble the king in any way, essentially. They must be beneath him, fixed in hierarchy again. And there's often this weird, this kind of sadness, this grief on the commoner's part. And you have this kind of court that's made this place of restriction, death. It's kind of mocking laughter and starvation, as opposed to this commoner forest of feasting, of laughter, of escape. And that isn't got away. That is kind of reinforced, if anything, by the king's reward. And it's strange that also plays out, of course, in the Guest of Robin Hood.
Yeah, like about exactly. Yeah. Only with the bonus action of getting to see Robin leave.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the best the things, of course, the things you don't get in the other medieval King Commoner texts is that that's the end. They're just fixed there, and it's this uncertain, weird end. Whilst in Robin Hood, he gets to escape. He gets to go back to the forest. He gets to start poaching again.
And lives there for 20-something years. Like it is really indicated like that is the better preferred life. I'm going to make a weird sort of comparison for the ending for the other tales, and that's the movie The Graduate. Are you familiar with how that movie ends?
I'm not. It's been too long since I've seen it.
So the Dustin Hoffman film, where it ends with him disrupting the marriage of, I forget the name of the actress and the character. It's been ages since I've seen it too, but the ending is very infamous, with him banging on the glass at the wedding. He gets the young woman, the bride, to leave with him. They run out of the church and they like just get on this bus, and like you kind of expect the film to just end there with this kind of like happy note, but then they're just kind of there in the back of the bus, and there's this kind of silence that falls on them, and their faces fall a little bit as sort of the reality the situation is just starting to sink in, and then the movie ends, where you're left with that like little bit of the, oh, I did the thing that I thought I wanted, but now there's going to be repercussions that I hadn't really considered, and is this really what I want? And now I'll have to find out. And that's the sense I get from those commoner tales where, oh, I got the thing that sounded good. I got in with the king. I'm sitting near the head of the table. I'm above the salt. Is this actually what I want? Oh no.
Yeah. I think that's very much it. Yeah. It's also, it just leaves
which is interesting, subtle storytelling. There's a reason why that ending is remembered. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Oh, by the way, one of the ones I haven't mentioned is how John the Reeve gets to the court. By the way, he rather than just arrive, he is King's messenger comes to him first to tell him, you've been summoned to court. You're going to be made a knight, and he immediately says, "Oh, my guest has betrayed me." He arms himself, storms the court, brains the court porter, kills 4 of the king's dogs.
Oh gosh!
And then rides into the court as though into the middle of a feast on his horse, as though he's the Green Knight.
Oh yeah, I have not read this. This is amazing.
His pitchfork into the king's high table, and then, in the words of the text, holds the king checkmate.
Oh wow!
Demanding to be rewarded and forgiven. It's it's a wonderfully again near radical thing. But then again, as soon as he is then forgiven, he then kind of immediately says, "Yeah," as I said, after a collar, I've heard after a collar comes a rope. I will be hanged by the throat. Methinks it go not well. Sudden regret, and there's this constant thing of I suppose it in some ways it does depend on who you side with in these tales. But if you have listened to all the commoners' complaints, and saying King Edward the Shepherd, the plight of the daughter is continuously raised in the court feast. Kind of, are you on their side, or are you on the king's side, laughing at them, mocking them? I think it's very difficult to laugh and mock these commoners. So if you don't, then you're left with this king who essentially betrays them.
Right, and
none of their complaints get solved.
That's what I was about to say. Like, I think that's kind of what puts the nail in the coffin of the
raiding parties, the restrictions, the commons being starved. It's not solved by the king. He just laughs at it, essentially, and ignores it in these texts, as far as we're told.
Yeah.
There's not an end bit where he then says, and all of my subjects. Well, I suppose that would also be quite difficult, because then he'd be saying, you can't have him declaring to the audience these texts, all the people in England can now poach, break the law. But these texts do have to ride a fine line.
The authors and readers of these texts could get in trouble if they if they were John Bull levels of radical.
Yeah, I mean, there are records of people who wrote texts that were perceived to be against the king and were killed. There are also fears of court spies at the time, which is quite funny given that, the wood has ears, field has sight kind of line. There are records of, say, a royal messenger was killed by people after they thought he was a royal spy who was coming to eavesdrop on them and trying to get them arrested and killed. No, we're not told exactly what they must have said who have got that panic. But it is a dangerous time and a dangerous thing to be talking about, which is possibly why these texts are also set in that past.
Right, that's true.
And when you get to the conservative texts, the royal propaganda is suddenly set in the present and very much in favour of the king.
Yeah.
The current king. So
they're either like those William of Orange ones you said, or those, Victorian age or Georgian age ones that are looking back at our mythic past, which then during an age of imperialism, so it's still very supportive of that sort of monarchist worldview at that time, still having a propaganda sort of feel.
Yeah, and it kind of moves away so far from these early texts. where you kind of have this, say, this forest as this strange liminal space, kind of on the edge of society, and of perhaps just slightly out of bounds of society as well, because of course the forest is out to be forest from outside, because it was the place outside normal society, because it's where only the king can go, and it's kind of in this liminal space that suddenly society's conventions can be suddenly pushed and challenged and reimagined in this strange world in both the Robin Hood and the King and Commoner texts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think you kind of then have this kind of this wonderful sight, kind of slightly outside of things, and of course Robin Hood's the perfect hero for that. This an outlaw who is again outside the law, who can
Right.
inhabit this space, yeah, and reimagine society, reimagine the rules.
And I think how Robin Hood relates to this is really interesting. There's an episode where we reviewed the Robin of Sherwood episode we mentioned earlier, which is called, appropriately enough, The King's Fool, because it very much delves into the things that you were just talking about, with when the commoner does come to court, being made to sort of be an entertainment for the king and his nobility. And then also from the collar goes the rope. He, like, it turns out he is in actual mortal peril in the court situation there, as the king's whims change. But one of the things I mentioned in that episode where we reviewed this is how much that episode made me rethink, like the first time I saw it when I was young, made me rethink the nature of the king and the relationship with Robin, because I had so much grown up on the Errol Flynn film, which, like I mentioned earlier, that's one of the few where Robin, like, gives him the political complaints, but at the end of the day, he's still the good king who gets reinstalled on the throne and pardons Robin, and everybody ends happily ever after with the good king back in power, and Robin happily, his final words are, "May I obey all your commands with equal pleasure."
What say you to that, Baron of Locksley? May I obey all your commands with equal pleasure, sire?
And then also seeing, like, the Prince of Thieves film when I was young, where good King Richard shows up at the end, looks very glorious and all of this. So, like, and then the children's storybooks that were playing off of these ideas. So that was the relationship between Robin and the king that I had in my mind. It wasn't, of course, until much, much later that I read the Jest. But in the meantime, I saw this Robin of Sherwood episode where John Rhys Davies plays King Richard, and it does actually play with the ideas in these medieval tales, where it does actually present this idea of perhaps he's not being given political complaints while he's in the forest and in disguise, but that subversion is still there, like we were mentioning, with the cost of the men's lives for the deer. The complaint is subtext instead of text, but it is there. And then the fact that the king turns out to not have any real loyalty to the man that he just pardoned, like that blew my mind when I was a kid. The first time I saw him, it's like, oh, you could, King Richard isn't just this unambiguously good and heroic figure. And so then, years later, then starting to read some of the medieval tales and seeing this conflict that exists where it becomes actually somewhere even murkier, where it is somewhere more in the middle, where Robin does express his loyalty to King Edward and then goes and leaves to join Edward's court, but then leaves Edward's court not because his life is directly under threat, like in the Robin of Sherwood episode, but just because he wanted to be in the forest instead and wanted to be his own master. And so finding that there is this middle ground that exists, that's the originator from the Robin Hood side of things, of this story, I find just really compelling, that there's so many different ways to play with these ideas and these tropes in the, to use the Leslie Coote phrase, the story worlds of Robin Hood.
Yeah, and yeah, at the end of the Guests of Robin Hood, you have that. The last line is about the king is instead of all. Is it all a dread, all a feared of the king again? He would not go to the court. So yeah, it's kind of a very different sentiment to
Yeah.
as was often seen in the films.
Yeah, that's true. He's not afraid when he's in court, but then once he leaves, he knows he can't come back.
Yeah, I mean, he's broken his while he's again he says he's loyal while serving the coach deer, which shows his disloyalty at the same time. He then just flee. He breaks his word. He breaks his word to stay with the king, to not poach anymore. Goes back to the forest and poaches, and yeah, this last image is of fear of opposition, which I think is often missed because it's most criticism of the Guest does say it's that despite being against the agents of the law and church, Robin shows himself to be faithful to the king to the end. I'm not sure that's necessarily fully true. I think it's slightly more subtle than that. It plays with loyalty, and ends with this kind of fear and opposition and separation. It's which I think does take it back to these King and Commoner texts, which I think also end in that with that kind of fear, this kind of lack of trust, if anything, even with this kind of superficially, potentially conservative end. It kind of what you take away from it is not necessarily positive feelings towards the court and the hierarchy as it exists. It kind of leaves you more questions than answers, perhaps.
Yeah. And that is one of the fun things about reading the stories and studying them, is that there are these different ways to interpret them, to think about them. We don't have the author's notes to tell us what they were exactly trying to get across. So it's a lot of that, trying to read into it, a lot of thinking about the context in which they're written, and all of those things.
It's also the wonderful thing about literature, though, in general. These texts, could certainly be read and enjoyed by one audience one way, and then the other side, you have Henry VIII would dress up as Robin Hood and play him. So you can have aristocrats also enjoying them and interpreting them a different way. We don't know, of course, which stories that Henry VIII may have read, of course, but it's
right. But
it can be read by multiple people, multiple audiences, and have multiple meanings. So even in these King Commoner texts, some of them seem to have more radical elements. The later ones have conservative elements. There's also one medieval one, which is also very conservative, the King and the Barker, which kind of is almost the model then for the later ones. So these texts can be used in different ways, for different ends, for different purposes, and even then have different interpretations depending on who you are, where you're reading it from. But that's the joy of it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. There's just always something a little bit different when you get the historical text, as opposed to something like Tolkien's writing, where so many people love to read his texts, and if we just had them on their own, there would be so much, even more discussion than there already is, about all the layers of metaphor that are present in there for how the forces of Sauron represent Nazi Germany and blah blah blah. But we also have his own introduction to an edition of the book saying, no, it's not a metaphor. Stop it. It's not allegorical. I hate allegory.
Yeah.
Quit it.
Oh, that's where death of the author comes in. Once texts are out in the world, they can be interpreted sometimes en masse in certain ways. I mean, look at William Langland's Piers Plowman. I mean, that was repeatedly used by the 1381 rebels, referenced. And yet William Langland hated it and hated that, and kind of rewrote it essentially, and wrote this kind of thing denouncing all of the way it's been used. But it still had this kind of mass cultural effect, regardless of what William Langland intended it to do.
Yeah. And that happens to this day all the time.
Yeah.
So you wrote a book about King and Commoner tales. If anybody wanted to find your book or find other sources for some of these tales, where should they go? How could they do that?
Well, my book is The King and Commoner Tradition, kind of less politics, medieval and early modern literature. There is a great way to look at some of the medieval King Commoner texts is 10 boards edited by Melissa Furrow. That's boards as in Bourdes. These texts often actually call themselves boards, interestingly. It's kind of a trick, essentially, a comic text or deception. Yeah, that's a very good resource. And because it's been published by what's it called? Teams. Team Middle English Text Series, Teams, the Medieval Institute of Western Michigan at Kalamazoo. You can find these ones online as well for free, as well as purchasing them. So that's a great resource for looking at some of the medieval ones. They're not quite all there. John the Reeve you can actually find in sentimental and humorous romances in the same series. Sadly, there isn't a single text that collects all of these King and Commoner ones, and nothing that collects the early modern ones. But yes, you can find them here and there.
I'll make sure to include a few links in the episode description if anybody is curious and wants to find out some more.
And my book, of course, has a fairly comprehensive list of all of the medieval and early modern texts. But even then, it expands so much afterwards.
Oh yeah.
You can look at something like Susanna Clarke writes a short story set in the Jonathan Strange Mr. Norrell universe called The Raven King and the Charcoal Burner, which draws on the it still goes to this day in various fun forms.
Oh yeah. I was thinking also about how it connects to fairy tale traditions. You get that lost king in the forest who meets a commoner or meets a strange creature that, like, Hands My Hedgehog is a really good example of this. And then they play with those same ideas that are present from that story in the Witcher series. So yeah, and modern, a lot of modern literature is still playing with these ideas. And not just the fantasy stuff too.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mark. Before you go, do you have just like a favorite Robin Hood adaptation that is the one that you sort of think of the most as what you latch onto it as Robin Hood?
Oh, I've got several.
Yeah, this is a question I often actually avoid with Robin Hood scholars because they have such a different relationship with Robin Hood than even other medievalists.
I mean, well, I have several. I adore Robin of Sherwood, the 1980s series, because it contains a lot of that radicalism and some of the less authentic, but I love kind of the occultic mysticism stuff.
Not authentic, but it
not
does,
authentic at all, but I love it.
King's Fool episode I mentioned, when we reviewed it, the end of it delves into that mystic element, and we're like, "Ooh, this got weird." But most of that episode, like, really plays with those King and Commoner elements we were talking about in really meaningful and thoughtful ways.
I also, perhaps unfashionably, love the Patrick Bergen and Uma Thurman film, which, again, possibly because it contains elements of the carnival coming through it, and I love that.
Yes, and so actually that is something I was thinking I might ask you about, because you mentioned the Feast of Fools, and that movie ends with the characters enacting this Feast of Fools and demanding entry to the castle because Friar Tuck is under the guise of being the Lord of Misrule, and we're just sort of taken at that for their word that, because it's the day of the Festival of Fools, because Tuck is in the guise of the Lord of the Fools, they can be denied entry to the castle when they would otherwise be denied. And I read that as like, well, that feels like a bit of a stretch of this notion, even though it is playing with a real idea. What do you make of that?
I mean, certainly they are permitted to, use public spaces and insist on their annual right to the festivities, whether the castle currently closed off counts as a public space that they can say, oh well, of course we must let them in. That seems perhaps a bit unlikely.
Yeah.
The May Games and both the winter festivities and the May Games kind of had these elements of inversion and potential for anarchy, which occasionally led to actual riots. But they were generally put on by the authorities and are often seen as a kind of almost a letting off of steam, a kind of a pressure valve. Instead, they kind of keep people happy for the year because they get this one day of riot. So
a little bit over the purge.
Anyway. I love things. Also, love things like the Wicker Man that kind of play with that kind of this weird idea of the carnival. It's not perhaps necessarily strictly historical. But it's kind of this complete upending. I do love that they used it though, because of course Robin Hood is very much part of the May Game festivities. I mean, we see once the Robin Hood tales start to become popular in the 15th century, suddenly in descriptions of kind of props for the May Games, suddenly there are lots of Robin Hood costumes, and the person leading the May Games is dressing up as Robin Hood instead of just a Lord of Misrule. And of course, Maid Marian herself is very much based on the Morris dance. You kind of even into the 16th century, you have descriptions of people playing the Maid Marian. It's always a man dressed as a woman. One of my favourites describes the beautiful Maid Marian with the handkerchief concealing his beard, or her beard. And also you have potentially Friar Tuck, of course, possibly coming from the mock, because of course the abbot of Misrule was part of these things. It's kind of this friar or abbot or boy bishop figure, this person who was a kind of inversion of usual religiosity, so would be perhaps and comes from the anti-clerical tradition, so it would be a feasting and lustful religious figure.
The friar, the holy man who embodies a bunch of sins.
And then of course in the Robin Hood play game fragment we have this friar who fights with Robin, Curtal Friar, so shortened or tucked robes, who is then draws with Robin Hood and his men. And Robin says, "Oh, you must join our band. Here is a troll of trust, a woman who you can dance with in the mire." And the friar says, "Oh, great! I'll strap on this huckle duckle that rises an inch above the buckle, which is presumably a wooden phallus," and dances with her. They're kind of very much a sexualized presence, all kind of very untraditionally religious, very carnival, and so very possibly came from the Morris, where you often had this kind of mock priest. So Robin Hood is at least brought into it and draws bits out of it to bring into its own legend. So I love that Patrick Bergman film kind of brings this carnival into it.
And it works very well that they have Friar Tuck being the Lord of Misrule for those reasons. He feels very appropriate for that, for all of those reasons just mentioned.
I also don't tell the other academics, but I also love the Disney animated one, which I think is actually one of the closest to the original legends, because at no point is Robin. At no point we're told that Robin is an aristocrat. It's very episodic and it's comic, and the original tales are very intentionally have elements of satire, political satire, but they're trickster narratives. They're comic, and I think so many modern adaptations miss that. They're always trying to do this kind of dark and serious one. This is the gritty, true one, and it's always very dour. And that's not, for me, as a lover of the medieval text, especially where Robin Hood thrives. He thrives this kind of elements of playfulness.
Especially in there are moments in the Jests where there's a lot of that playfulness. Robin Hood and Potter, it's very evident. And so we're doing this ranked list of the Robins because just people on the internet love ranked lists of things. And so as we've been going through every single film and television adaptation, we've been kind of ranking what we think are the best Robins or the worst Robins. And we've put the Fox on the top. And I didn't grow up really loving that movie. Like, I didn't dislike it or anything, but in terms of how well that version of the character embodies, kind of like really just distills down sort of the essence of Robin Hood, the trickery, the disguising, the humor, the swashbuckling, the being a figure of hope for people, but mostly just by being playful. Like, it distills it down the best, and Brian Bedford's performance really just drives it home.
Very good. Yeah. My favorite would either be the Fox or Patrick Bergen. It's very close. Errol Flynn just missing out in third place, but yeah, only just. But yeah, it's one of the most difficult ones to rank, I think.
When you know a lot of them, yeah. Very much, very much. Yeah. I mean, as far as like films go, the Errol Flynn one ranks very high in my heart. And yeah, the Disney cartoons, like I probably wouldn't put it in my top 5 favorite films, mostly because it is so episodic, because it just sort of ends with like, oh, and now Richard's back and everything's fine. And it's like,
it also has that weird middle section, which is kind of just boring with the kids just kind of mucking around with Maid Marian for no aim whatsoever.
Yeah. Exactly. So like, as a movie, I don't love it, but it's a great version of Robin, and very fun. And Errol Flynn also, like, the movie I love, and he does rank very high as a good Robin. And then the Richard Green from the television show also ranks very high.
That's such a good show as well. The writing is so clever in that one. And then is there one called the Robin and the Ghosts of Sherwood as well? A film? I've never seen it.
Yeah, there's something called The Ghost of Sherwood, which is some kind of zombie movie. Since we're doing everything chronologically, we haven't gotten to it yet. We just covered Prince of Thieves last week, so we'll get to it eventually. I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not a big horror movie guy.
I can recommend avoiding there's one with Robin Hood and the Dragon as well, which is that one's horrendous.
I've had somebody specifically ask to be the special guest to watch that one with us.
Goodness.
Maybe I'm hoping that there's some campy fun to be had with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those. It's almost so bad it's good.
Yeah, it is. Fingers crossed that would be the case. Because sometimes that is. Sometimes they're just very bad.
Actually, possibly one of the worst I've seen. I can't remember quite what it was called now. I think it's from the 70s or 80s, and it's a Robin Hood kung fu.
Oh,
film.
wow. Yeah, you've seen that.
Yes. Is it? I think the person who's playing, was playing Friar Tuck, possibly, is from Japan or something, and he's a kung fu.
Like, Friar Tuck has a friend that he brings over, who's the kung fu monk. It's like the title gets translated into English is Robin Hood, Arrows, Beans, and Karate.
Yes, that's right, because they filmed another one at the same time, which was a Western, which also had a very similar title, which was the only reason there were beans in the title, as far as
it was an in-joke about these other movies that the studio was making. It's very weird, very bad. It has a bodybuilder, Alan Steele, as Robin Hood, but that definitely loops into the so bad it's good, because in part because it's just so ridiculous. I met a young woman over the summer at a conference. She deeply loves bad movies and kind of like really specializes in them, and I recommended that one to her, and it was exactly the right sort of beat that she looks for in bad movies.
That one is so.
It has slide whistles in the sound effects and things.
Oh, it's awful. It's great. Wow. It's very funny.
Yeah. But a very obscure one. Yeah, there was one movie that we were anticipating being very bad, but ended up quite liking, which was The Men of Sherwood Forest with Don Taylor, which was a Hammer film. But we found it actually really kind of pretty clever and well done. We actually ended up really liking that one and thought it was just legitimately good.
I'll have to look that one up. I love a Hammer film.
It's actually getting a special like remastered release.
I'll
Yeah,
look out for that.
and I think they're packaging Wolf's Head along with it as well.
Oh.
And the other one that we kind of stumbled upon that we ended up really liking is a Soviet era film called The Arrows of Robin Hood. And we really liked that one. That's kind of one of our absolute favorites.
I'll have to look up the episodes you're talking about them and look up for the film.
Yeah,
I think I've heard about that one, but I've never seen it. Yeah.
yeah, hard to find. All right.
Yeah. I've got a new to watch list.
Yeah, such is our life. Sort of thing that we have consigned ourselves to. I find myself reading and watching so many Robin Hood things, and sometimes it's like, well, I'm not sure I want to read this new Robin Hood novel, but it just came out, so I feel like I need to. So it goes. There's worse things. Well, this has been really fun, Mark. Glad to finally meet up with you, even if digitally.
It's been really nice. Thank you for having me on.
My thanks again to Mark for joining us in the Greenwood to discuss how Robin Hood fits in amongst the popular king and commoner tales of the Middle Ages. If you'd like to know more about the food that these characters might have been consuming in these tales, you can check out Mark's appearance on the British Food History podcast. You can find a link to that episode, as well as links to the texts of some of these stories in the episode description. Even if all of the details from A Jest of Robin Hood haven't been preserved, if you've seen a film adaptation of Robin Hood, then odds are you've encountered at least some vestige of the king and commoner tale elements that have made their way into our modern retellings. Personally, I think there's a lot that can still speak to audiences today about what lessons authoritative leaders could learn from their suffering citizens. But, perhaps more importantly, what the rest of us can glean from the words of John the Reeve. After a collar comes a rope. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject, even if it's just to say how much you love Patrick Stewart's cameo as King Richard in Men in Tights. You can reach out over social media or email. We're on Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, and Instagram, all with the handle Into Greenwood. There's also a Robin Hood-centric Discord server where we play games, share photos, organize watch parties, and run a book club. We're currently in the process of selecting what our next read will be. If you'd like an invitation, then just reach out via one of the methods mentioned above and ask. If you are willing and able to help us keep this podcast going, then please consider going to patreon.com/intogreenwood, where you can contribute as little as $1 per month to help keep this podcast on the air. This month, we'd like to give an extra thank you to the aptly named Ivanhoe Loxley, who has joined us at the Stout Yeoman tier. Thank you to all of the Stout Yeomen, Merry Bandits, and Notorious Outlaws that help keep this digital Greenwood available for all. If you'd like to show a little appreciation for all the work that goes into putting these episodes together, but aren't sure about a recurring donation, then you can help keep us well caffeinated for these late night editing sessions by going to buymeacoffee.com/intogreenwood. You can also peruse our fine Robin Hood themed merch at our Dashery shop or by searching for Into the Greenwood on tpublic.com. As an independent podcast that is brought to you ad-free, every single purchase or small donation makes an immense difference. And since this whole endeavor was inspired by our guy Robin, Into the Greenwood will always donate a minimum of 10% of all proceeds to charity. Our select charity remains Trees, Water, and People, a top-rated organization working to provide sustainable solutions that provide food and clean water to impoverished communities around the world. Also helpful is, of course, any sort of sharing of episodes, rating and reviewing on your favorite podcast app, and all those sorts of wonderful, super useful, and absolutely free methods that help others find the show. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke. No portion of this podcast has been created with the use of generative AI. The theme music for Into the Greenwood is by Plastic 3. That's all for now, though. So once again, I find myself wishing you all safe travels until our next journey together into the Greenwood.